part of the it's part of the Food for Thought panel events. So I'm Alice Reid. I'm a demographer in the geography department here in Cambridge, and my expertise is mainly in historical demography, particularly child and maternal survival in the 19th and early 20th centuries. This is obviously a bit tangential to our topic today, for which the real knowledge and discussion will be provided by our panelists. But before I introduce our panelists, I've got a few housekeeping notes. So the audience, your microphones and cameras are set to off, and they will remain off throughout the webinar. I want you just to remember that the event is being recorded, but you will be very welcome to use the Q&A function throughout the event to put questions to the panel. So don't wait to the end. If you've got a question, you can use the Q&A function to ask the question at any point. You won't be able to raise your hand, and I think the chat function has been disabled as well. So the Q&A is the way to go. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the panelists. Dr. Akanksha Mahpatia is an honorary research associate at UCL and a member of the Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health. Her research focuses on how gender inequality, maternal and infant undernutrition shape educational attainment and girls' early marriage. Mduduzi Mbuya is the Director of Knowledge Leadership for GAIN, which is the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. He has worked for over 2 decades on nutrition-sensitive programs and policy in lower and middle-income countries, and he also does this in his current role at GAIN. Professor Anne Prentice is the former director of the MRC Elsie Widdowson Laboratory, previously known as the MRC Human Nutrition Research Institute in Cambridge. She was the program leader of the MRC Nutrition and Bone Health Research Group in Cambridge and head of the Calcium, Vitamin D and Bone Health Research team at the MRC unit in the Gambia. And finally, Rodrigo Rivera is an economist for the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. Since 2020, he's been coordinator of the Nutrition Sensitive Social Protection and Food Crisis thematic area in the Social Protection Team, SOCPRO, at FAO's Division of Inclusive Rural Transformation and Gender Equality. Before this, he worked for several years on poverty, food security, and nutrition analysis and policy at FAO's Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. So we're here to talk about child nutrition globally and so on. And we're going to start off with an audience poll. So we would like you to give your opinion of which factor you think is the most important between poverty, access and education. And you should be shown a poll which you can vote for now. So I'll just give you a couple of moments to do that voting. Here it is. So which factor do you think is the most important? Oh, sorry, cost, availability or access and education. And then a second question, do you feel that you have enough resources to raise healthy children? Yes or no? So we'll have the results of that poll, I think, at the end when you'll have a chance to vote again. But while until then, I'm going to, oh, sorry, we've got the results now. That's great. So, oh, they've disappeared, so I can't see them, but I'll tell them to you at the end. We're going to move on to presentations by our panelists, each going to try and answer the main question, and they're going to speak for a maximum of 7 minutes. And we're going to start with Anne on the importance of nutritious diets in early years and the possible effects of a poor diet, and indeed, what is a poor diet? So over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Alice. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to have this chance to speak with you today. Yes, I'm going to be speaking about the dietary aspects rather than the problems in other respects. But the perspectives that I bring to this discussion is that I've worked as a basic nutrition scientist for over 40 years in resource-poor rural and urban communities, mostly in Africa, but also in Asia. And I've also been involved for many years in this country with the UK National Diet and Nutrition Survey and acting as a scientific advisor on nutrition. So we're here to think about why we can't keep our children healthy. And I think it's worth saying from the start that compared to 40 years ago, when I first started in this, actually the world's children by and large are healthier now than they were 40 years ago. At that time, severe undernutrition, and by which I mean marasmus and kwashiorkor, starvation, or the potbelly that you'll remember, were commonplace in many parts of the world. And there were also micronutrient deficiencies such as blindness caused by lack of vitamin A, or cretinism due to iodine deficiency, amongst many. So many infants and young children grew poorly. So they were either very thin for their height or they were short for their age. And this was often related to poor nutrition in the mother during pregnancy. So they were born small. Increasing use back in the 1970s of formula milks, which was replacing breastfeeding in parts of Africa, and then weaning onto poor quality and appropriately prepared weaning foods, which caused diarrhea and many other problems. And diseases such as measles and polio and malaria, very high incidence. And of course, for many of the subsistence farmers in those populations, they really did have to grow what they were going to eat. And so food shortages, when the rains failed or indeed were too heavy, or the locusts descended, there was little safety blanket for them. And so there were episodic famines. So since that time, there's a much greater understanding. There's been a lot of research done in the area of nutrition science and in many other areas. And the Millennium Goals and so on, we've seen reduced mortality at birth and in infancy and in the under fives generally. It's not perfect, of course, but it's gone down. There have been successful vaccination and health campaigns, which have reduced some of the deaths and morbidity from the diseases I mentioned. There's much more public awareness and education, especially for women in lower middle income countries, and promotion of breastfeeding. Many subsistence farmers that I've come across anyway have gone into mixed economy, so they have some cash either from growing cash crops or from members who are earning or have come to Europe and are sending back money or are on government benefits. So there's less reliance on needing to grow food for the family. And of course, as we'll hear about later, there have been improved crop varieties and diversification, and the ability for food to move around the globe has improved immeasurably since the 1970s. However, these old problems haven't gone away, and in fact, they may be re-emerging in many places, and unexpected places too. But then new challenges have emerged, and of these, obesity due to the overconsumption of calorie-rich foods and drinks has become a major issue worldwide. Childhood obesity is associated with many chronic diseases during childhood, as well as setting up problems for later life. In countries like here in the UK, this is the major nutritional challenge for our children. Our national surveys have shown that the prevalence of childhood obesity is increasing even during the COVID lockdowns. And except for something vitamin D, most young children in this country have reasonable micronutrient status. But in many parts of the world, severe undernutrition and obesity can often occur side by side, even in the same families. And this we call the double burden of malnutrition. There can be coexisting micronutrient deficiencies on top of that as well, and iron is the most common at the moment worldwide, and we'll hear about that later too. And so that one is then a triple burden. And as you can imagine, this presents a really complex challenge to know how to tackle the problem both at government level and at the family level. So I was asked to describe what was a poor diet. It's very difficult. We know much more these days about the amounts of energy, the macronutrients, fat, carbohydrate, and protein, and micronutrients that are needed for a healthy diet. But designing a mix of foods and drinks that can be sustained over a period of time is actually very difficult, both for those making recommendations and for the general public who actually, need to make the decisions. And this is especially problematic when we're talking about feeding infants and young children during the process of weaning from breast milk onto complementary and supplementary foods, and then introducing them to adult foods. And the mix will be different in different cultures and countries, depending on local dietary customs and the foods available. Many and varied factors affect options available and the choices that can be made, and including those you as the audience have been asked to consider, which is the poverty, access, and education. And just to finish off, I want to say we have to remember that diet is not the only ingredient in helping to keep our children healthy. They need a stimulating environment, physical and mental activity, home security, and many, many other factors. And I'm sure we'll hear a little more about that from our other presenters too. So thank you very much for listening. Alice, back over to you.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. I'm going to hand over now to Mduduzi on the policies that ought to be in place and the challenges they have to work.
Thank you very much, Alice, and thank you to the audience for joining this discussion with us today. So one of the biggest constraints to the survival and health of children is unhealthy diets. And I'm also a nutritionist, so perhaps this shapes my analysis, but the evidence certainly bears this out, as Anne has shared in a good amount of detail. So as I see it, the main issue that we face for achieving this end, healthier diets for children, is that households across the world do not have access to and cannot procure or grow diets that align with the needs of their children. So I do see food systems as an important focus of policy actions, especially those that nudge food systems in two ways. First, towards increasing the availability, affordability, as well as the appeal of safe and nutritious food. And secondly, away from nutrient-poor refined foods, products that are high in sugars, fats, and or salt. So food systems policies, I think, are important. And there are various types of policy actions that we can hone in on. So if we start off broad and fairly specific, there needs to be a range of actions that orient food systems towards healthier diets. And these range from agricultural policy that guide what is grown and how it is grown, and policies that shape supply chain infrastructure so that farms and markets can be linked in a sustainable way, but also financial actions and financial policy that ensure that food chain actors have access to financing, that taxes are appropriately and equitably applied, as well as used as a lever for effecting change. I'll get into a little bit of detail on this. But also business incentives and the appropriate regulations and laws that shape shape the business environment, provide carrots and sticks for businesses to maximize good and minimize harm. But all of that is a lot of policy options. It's helpful to frame those in a broad sense. I will acknowledge my colleagues who worked on the food systems dashboard. That's a tool for decision makers at national programs and policy levels, who have enumerated about 42 policy actions that cut across the food system. But I will elaborate on two categories of these policy actions to illustrate, and these are policy actions that I consider to be important to be more responsive to your question, Anne. The first of these are policies that support an enabling environment for business. So we can't ignore businesses in this conversation, because the private sector shapes a great deal of food supply and is therefore a critical player in the food system, and government policy can ensure that they shape this food supply in a more positive direction or in more positive ways. And what levers governments have include regulation, taxation, and trade policies. And these can provide the right balance of carrot and stick. So on the one hand, making it worthwhile for businesses to operate and provide incentives for providing nutritious and safe food, so that these incentives or nutrition aligns with their bottom line. But on the other hand, punishing bad actors in ways that deter suboptimal behaviors. To elaborate, an example of this punishing the bad that I alluded to in my latter point are taxes on sugar-sweetened beverages that we see in Latin America that have been instituted as a response to trends in consumption and health outcomes, the double burden of malnutrition that Anne elaborated. An example of working on or leveraging the good is fortification, where industries add nutrients to widely consumed foods in a bid to address micronutrient deficiency. And these are often based on mandates or government regulations that are instituted by governments in response to data on micronutrient status and food consumption. But you will note that the common thread in these examples that I've articulated government levers in terms of policy actions and the alignment of trends in status as well as consumption patterns, and using these government levers to effect changes in the business environment and create a carrot in terms of in the case of fortification, or a stick in the case of taxation. Another example that I will point to pertains to public food procurement. So we do need governments to make purchasing commitments for nutritious food. And they oftentimes do this by incorporating these foods into school feeding, social protection, safety net, and health systems provisioning. So these are policies and procurement actions that target the vulnerable among us, and in the ways that in the places that they are located, schools as a specific example. So they're directly responsive to needs. They facilitate the provisioning of nutritious food to these populations and in those situations. But the knock-on effect of focusing on public food procurement is that this can also send a powerful signal to farmers and small and medium enterprises in the local food system, so that their prioritization or what they produce or process in response to the public food procurement system is in line with what is needed by children. And examples of this can relate to including legumes in public food procurement, biofortified crops, and so forth. So making healthier choices for food procurement. So in terms of challenges in the policy space, I would focus on two common challenges that prevent us from making sure that these policies work for good and to minimize bad. The first challenge that we often face is the coherence of policies. So in terms of this, there are many policies that, as I've mentioned earlier, I alluded to 42 food system policy action, which is quite a lot, and we haven't enumerated other policies that governments prioritize in the spaces of agriculture, health, and so forth. So they do multiply. And oftentimes the challenge that's faced by governments and those who support them lies in ensuring that policies and policy actions are aligned and mutually reinforcing towards a clear goal or clear set of goals. So achieving that coherence can make sure that we prioritize policies that are mutually synergistic and that are not, at the end of the day, siloed. A second challenge that's commonly faced is the absence of the right types of data that can help policymakers to properly diagnose the problem and decide on what policy actions and legislative levers to prioritize. It's important to know what the problem is and to know how it's distributed, usually at a sub-national or more granular level, so that policies are not one size fits all at the national level. And the data or evidence has to be actionable, presented or analyzed in a way that can help policymakers who have a slew of decisions and things to think about and prioritize to decide or make the quickest and smartest decisions about what policy actions should be prioritized, how they should be sequenced as well. So yeah, thank you for your question. I'll hand it back to you. Those are some of the points that I had in mind. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. There's loads to think about there. But before we come to asking some questions, but please do keep putting your questions into the question and answer function. We're going to turn to our next speaker, who is Akanksha on gender inequality and geographical poverty. Over to you, Akanksha.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me to talk today. So I'd like to start by saying that I think we're still not addressing the interlinkage between the key social and biological factors that keep children unhealthy. So I'm going to talk today about 3 factors and how specifically they interact, but really in the context of the Global South: education, stunting, and women's early marriage. And to me, these factors are all markers of persistent gender inequality. So I worked in international education and gender policy for about 2 decades before I transitioned to academia. And what I've learned during that time is that our education interventions often just simply didn't work. And that's because scholarships and other technical solutions haven't worked to keep the girls in school. And that's in one way because there are a lot of other reasons why girls don't go to school that we don't address through the education sector. So this is again coming back to the point that we need to think holistically and broader, that there are things other than just the cost of schooling that may keep girls from going to school. And in any case, school-based initiatives will miss those girls and boys that are already out of school. But yet we know that education and health are very closely linked, and we know that education keeps people healthy. So I think we really still need to have a much broader understanding of how people's lives are connected, so then we know how to change the several factors at the same time. So another difficult problem is stunting. And it's easy to think of child undernutrition as the thin child. But stunting or shorter stature is a strong marker of a cumulative burden of many different stresses, and these are both biological and societal. So it's another intractable problem, just like education. And again, I think that technical solutions have not worked as well as we would have hoped. So once again, like education, we know that stunting has consequences for poor health in adulthood. So now let's look at how things that happen in society impact things that happen in biology. And to me, women's early marriage, which occurs before the age of 18 years, brings together both biological and social factors that act through the life course. So we have found that early marriage is both a predictor and a consequence of stunting. And we know, for example, that stunting starts in fetal life. And in rural Nepal, we have found that women's early marriage, independent of their early childbearing, was associated with neonatal stunting. So it's not just about the biological factors, but also the social factors that are associated with stunting. In rural India, we found that both poor infant growth and lower education of girls were predictors of early marriage. And we've also shown that both stunting and early marriage are associated with school dropout. So once again, it's this interlinkage between these multiple factors that I think we need to do a much better job of addressing. At a very broader level, early marriage is also a marker of gender inequality. So now I'm going to connect these three different factors under the umbrella of gender inequality, or the lower status of women relative to men. We looked across 96 countries, and we found that gender inequality was the more important factor for low birth rate than GDP. And we're seeing the same pattern within countries. So like stunting, we're finding the gender inequality also starts in early life. And in a way, it's really saying that girls and boys don't start life on an even playing field. So in rural Nepal, similar to other South Asian societies, wealthy families are having sex-selective abortions. What this really means is that the girls are actually being born into households that are less able to invest in them. So in this way, a social norm that favors boys is both creating and maintaining gender inequality. But addressing gender inequality is notoriously difficult. And so here I'm going to draw a bit on my policy experience before, when I actually worked within communities. And in a project in rural Nepal, we were giving basic literacy training to women to actually document the unpaid care work, which is cooking, cleaning, taking care of children. And the goal was to increase recognition of this work for keeping children and families healthy. In the end, the project gave a greater voice to women in their communities and at home. So it was a success. And we expected that these women, understanding and acknowledging the importance of their own literacy, would keep their daughters in school. But when we returned 6 months later, we realized that actually something different had happened. These women who were now literate were able to access paid work. So they actually pulled their daughters out of school because somebody had to replace them in the home to do the unpaid care work. And they explained to us that, in fact, it was doing the paid work through their literacy, which gave them more decision-making power. And in any case, the girls were going to marry early. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is it's really difficult to address gender inequality. And while we can learn from policies and programs that have worked very well, I think we can still learn a lot from programs that haven't worked so well. So I'd like to end by saying that I think we still need a much greater emphasis on societal solutions. We still need to address the fundamental societal aspects that are keeping children from being healthy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kanksha. Again, lots to think about, and an increasing, you're all coming up with these ideas that things need to be addressed at a societal level, which is very important. But before we come to more discussion, I'm going to hand over to our final speaker, Rodrigo, who's going to talk about social protections in food production.
Thank you, Alice. And good afternoon to everyone, good morning and good evening to those joining in other regions. First of all, let me thank the Interdisciplinary Research Centers for the invitation. I'm pleased to be part of this series of Food for Thought panel events, along with my other colleagues who also participate today. In order to respond to the question that guides our discussion today, let me split my intervention in two sections. First, as a first section that will establish the relationship between food consumption and health and nutrition outcomes, and a second section that will try to bring to the table the type of things we can do to strengthen these links. So, why can we keep our children healthy? This is certainly a challenging question to answer, but let me start with a short and a broad answer. In my opinion, the causes lay behind the way the agri-food systems work. When I mention agri-food systems, I refer to the entire range of actors and their interlinked value-adding activities that involve production, aggregation, processing, distribution, consumption, and disposal of food products. Why do I think that agri-food systems are associated with the causes of malnutrition and poor health among the population, especially among children? Well, because despite the central role that food plays in our overall health status, millions of people still lack access to safe, nutritious and sufficient food. Globally, almost 3.1 billion people could not afford a healthy diet in 2020. And at the current average cost of a healthy diet, roughly $3.5 per person per day, it is estimated that almost 90% and 70% of the population in low income and lower middle income countries cannot afford it. For children, we know that an adequate diet, one that is balanced in energy and nutrients and diversified enough, can have significant effects on child growth and development in the short and the long run, and in their ability to learn. In low and middle income countries, 2 in 3 children under 5 experience food poverty, meaning that children are not fed the minimum diverse diet they need to grow and develop to their full potential. In addition, poor diet quality can lead to different forms of malnutrition, including malnutrition, micronutrient diets, micronutrient deficiencies, as well as overweight and obesity, something that was already mentioned by Anne. In 2020, an estimated of 22% of the children under 5 years of age were stunted, almost 7% were wasted, almost 6% were overweight. This means that at least approximately 230 million children suffer from one form of malnutrition. Moreover, we can observe clear inequalities in child malnutrition. Children in rural settings and poorer households were more vulnerable to stunting and wasting, whereas children in urban areas and wealthier households were at a higher risk of overweight. Finally, it is hard for families to access food when incomes are low, food prices are high, or both income and prices experience high variability. According to the World Bank, people living in extreme poverty spend about 2/3 of their income on food. As you can imagine, this makes it hard for households to afford a nutrient-adequate diet and even harder for a healthy one. In this context, what can we do? How can we close the gap so that every individual meets their food needs for an active and healthy life at all stages of life cycle, in particular children? Well, let me focus on a few aspects. Certainly, social policies can be part of the set of policies that can contribute to transforming the agri-food systems to reduce the gap between household incomes and the cost of healthy diets, as well as increase the affordability of nutrient-rich and diverse diets. In particular, social protection policies and programs have shown to be effective in improving the food security, nutrition, and health, particularly among children and women. For now, let me focus on social assistance programs, one type of social protection intervention that address household income constraints by providing cash and income transfers, school meals, agricultural inputs or assets, among access to other resources. Evidence shows that social assistance programs improve dietary diversity and intake of micronutrient-rich foods among children, as well as improve several nutrition outcomes. For instance, cash transfers programs can have positive impacts on children's dietary diversity and micronutrient intake, as well as in reducing child wasting and stunting. In-kind transfer programs show similar impacts on diet and nutrition outcomes, and also show significant effects on increasing hemoglobin concentration and reducing anemia prevalence. In the case of school meals, evidence shows that well-designed school feeding programs, particularly those that provide micronutrient fortified foods, can provide nutritional benefits to both young children and their young siblings. And if connected with public food procurement, these programs have the potential to also work for the economic inclusion of smallholder farmers. Regarding nutrition-sensitive agricultural interventions, emerging evidence on home gardens suggests that this type of interventions can have simultaneous effects on access to nutritious foods, intake of micronutrients, and in some cases in the growth and development of young children. Furthermore, new evidence highlights the critical role program design plays in increasing the positive impacts of social assistance programs. For instance, programs that included behavior change communication were associated with a higher proportion of positive impacts for macronutrient intake, reduction of stunting and anemia, and increase of weight for high disease score among children. Also, programs that included both households and individual transfer were more likely to increase hemoglobin concentration and reduce anemia and stunting than those that did not. And programs that included fortified foods were more likely to result in significant improvements in stunting, weight for high disease score, and anemia. Let me close my interventions by answering one additional question. Does social protection policies and programs are enough to improve children's health? The answer, of course, is no. Social protection policies and programs are not a silver bullet. Evidence also shows that these interventions are more effective if they are complemented with other interventions such as in health, education, and women empowerment, among others. Also, it is central to take into consideration contextual factors that may affect program effectiveness. Of course, different contexts require poses different questions and challenges. I'm sure that in the open discussions, we will be able to develop further these and other ideas. So thank you for your attention, and over to you, Alice.
Thank you very much. So we've got lots to talk about, I think, loads of really important things coming up there. Please carry on putting your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to start off with a few questions of my own just to get the ball rolling, and then I'll draw in some of the questions that you put there as we go through. So I'm going to start off by noting that this webinar follows on from a very similar one last year, which focused about child nutrition in wealthy countries, and particularly in the UK. And the speakers at that webinar highlighted an alarming increase in child hunger. But, Anne, in her intervention today, highlighted, what we all know, which is in other parts of the world, there's actually been a vast improvement in child nutrition, particularly in stunting in lower and middle income countries. And I wonder, what does this say? And I think I just wanted to draw in one of the comments which has appeared in the chat, which is by an author of a recent study which found that iron deficiency in preschool age children in the UK is really quite high, in vitamin D deficiency. These iron deficiency at 31%, vitamin D deficiency at 14%, and one or more micronutrient deficiencies in the UK estimated at 48%. To what extent, does this mean that actually differences in child nutrition between the wealthy countries and less wealthy countries are actually converging? Are these the same problems? Are they different problems? Are they caused by different things? Are these similar sorts of food inadequacies? Are they different? I'm going to start off by asking you, Anne, because you talked about this this massive reduction in stunting in particular, and in ill health in many parts of the world. Can you comment on this?
Yes, I hope I haven't come with the impression that we can just be complacent. I mean, there is a lot of problems out there. I was merely trying to put it in perspective that we have learnt quite a lot, I think, in the last 40 years, which gives us more ammunition and the armory, as it were, to think about how to tackle them. And I was very impressed with the other talks there, that actually I think we are able to hone down on certain aspects that are really important. So global north and global south is a huge, what are we talking about? The whole of the African continent or something, the whole of India and Pakistan and so on. I mean, it just becomes stereotypical to try and put it all into one pot. But I suppose that where it is converging is around the issues to do with obesity. I've worked in Soweto as well as in the UK, as it were, where obesity is in Soweto, it is a major problem at all ages. And it is due to, diets that are high in fat, high in sugars, just as they are here. And it's related to poverty, but poverty in complex ways. People not necessarily having the means to cook very easily, so eating street food. And that is increasing, of course, here in the UK, which we need to watch out for. Aspects to do with socialization. In Soweto, people like to go out and eat their equivalent of a quadruple mac, which they have as their snack every day. That's a gross generalization. But and then sweet drinks, sugar sweetened beverages. That was mentioned earlier, worldwide, people like the taste and they like them. And water isn't necessarily a safe drink to take. So all of that is complex, but I think in the obesity side, yes, it is converging to some extent. I'd be interested to hear what the others say.
Yes, I'm going to, Rodrigo, you brought in some statistics in your talk about the extent of stunting and wasting and the difference between rural and urban areas. Do you want to come in on this?
Yes, thank you, Alice. Yes, I think, let me share a bit of the experience of the Latin American countries. I think it's a very particular region in the sense that as we have seen income grow, we have seen the reduction of undernutrition, but at the same time we haven't seen an increase in overweight and obesity. And of course, this is associated with the changes not only in incomes but also changes in food patterns, food consumption patterns that are also associated with food environments and availability of more highly processed food that probably were like 30-40 years before. So I would say that there's an income gradient that we can see at the country level and also at the household level, in which we can distinguish that in low income countries in Latin America, we can see that the increase in overweight and obesity among children is more associated with wealthier households, while in high income countries, obesity and overweight among children is more associated with poor households. So I think this is something that we need to explore more and definitely do more research about, and how different levels of income, not only at the country level but also at the household level, can affect the evolution of all forms of malnutrition. And already mentioned that in some cases we can even see the double or the triple burden of malnutrition. So that's something that I wanted to share. Let me stop there.
Thanks very much. You talked about the sorts of data that we can have, and Nduduzi, you also talked about data and the availability of data, and I wondered, do you think it's very difficult to compare, wealthy countries and poor countries because we're gathering different sorts of data about our children's health? Is that too simplistic?
It's not too simplistic. Just to step back to Anne's comment, I think there is a convergence that's happening in terms of the double burden and that duality of nutritional problems being common in low income and middle and high income countries alike. And data is really important, and I think it's helpful that Thai Bill added the link to a paper on micronutrient deficiency. I will also call out a recent publication that Thai Bill worked on as well. titled "Measuring What the World Eats," and it speaks to your question, Anne, because what the authors did was look at diet quality across the world using a comparable tool so that we could see what the trends are across different countries. And an interesting point that you'll see there is that heterogeneity really is driven by differences between countries rather than regions. So while we have a convergence in terms of the types of diet issues that we see, the heterogeneity is more at the country level than regional level. I'm putting it simplistically as well. But in terms of some of the differences that we can speak to, I think it's useful also to think about nutrition and its drivers in the context of the UNICEF conceptual framework, because some of the differences that we see between regions lie in some of the other aspects of the underlying causes of malnutrition. So, for example, access to health and a sanitary environment. So those are issues that might differ from between lower income countries and higher income countries in terms of the importance or relevance of sanitation, environmental factors like access to cook stoves, as well as the levels of poverty, which might mean that lead to the fact that what differs really between high income and low income countries is the magnitude of the burden of deficiency rather than the types of deficiency that might exist. So it's good to look at data in a more holistic way and think also about some of the factors that underlie malnutrition. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We've had quite a good discussion about this. I'm going to move on to a different question, and Akanksha hasn't had a chance to answer a question. So I'm going to ask her a question, which is something really that I had on my list of questions, but Ken Ong has also put a question in here about sex differences. And the question is childhood stunting more prevalent in girls than boys in Nepal? Can you see that in the data that you have? And to other people, I think, in a way, do such sex differences exist in the Gambia? Does this indicate context-specific determinants, but also context-specific solutions? So, Akanksha, I'm going to start off with you on that one.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, the first thing I want to say is, yes, of course, there's context-specific determinants and solutions, but I think gender inequality is something that does cut across all contexts. Perhaps it shows up in different ways, but I think it is that. In Nepal, I think, as in many countries, at the very young ages, it's still boys that are more vulnerable in early life. But as we follow the sexes through the life course, we're seeing that girls are actually more undernourished. So that's also telling you that after they're born, there is perhaps whether it be active discrimination or whether it be a lack of the ability to buy nutritious foods or enough food to give it to all family members equally, or gender norms about how you give food to who and when and how much. I think what we're seeing is through the life course that women are on the whole, especially in Nepal, more undernourished, but I think we'd find that in other contexts as well. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the Gambia, so I'd ask somebody else to speak to that.
That one was probably directed at me.
Yes.
so thank you, Ken. I don't think there is the same issue about there is sex discrimination, gender discrimination in the way that the two sexes are viewed. But in terms of growth and access to food, I don't think we see the same thing in rural Gambia. What we do see, though, is there are different effects on the rate of growth. And so girls tend, the delay to their puberty that occurs during undernutrition seems to occur later, if I see what I mean. It's more delayed than the start of puberty for boys. And so you'll get that real difference occurring during the pubertal growth spurt, which may actually not really be biological. It's due to a delay. They will catch up. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is something we can debate for many hours. The other thing is that boys, as as was mentioned, they actually have different nutrient requirements from birth, really. And so in countries where calcium and vitamin D are inadequate, then boys do tend to suffer from rickets more than girls, for example. So there are aspects where there are differences, but they are in a way more biological than the families restricting food for the girls, if I can put it that way. That's my experience anyway. You're muted, Alice.
Thank you. Yes, I realised. Thanks very much. We haven't got an awful lot of time, so I'm going to, try moving through some of these questions a little bit more quickly now. So we've got a question on fortified foods. So we've had fortified breakfast cereals and bread in the UK for years. And is it correct to say or assume that children getting nutrition in that sort of chemically fortified way is better than not getting that at all? And if so, what are the risks and benefits of an industry using these fortifications as a way to justify providing these chemically fortified foods rather than foods which include those in a natural form? And what are the risks and benefits of parents relying on those rather than sourcing more naturally nutritious foods? Daduzi.
Yes, I can you respond to that in part, hopefully in whole. My view about fortification, and the question pertains to industrial fortification specifically, is that it has a place. I think it's one of the tools that we have in our shed. To put it more specifically, the ideal that we hold is diversifying diets and ensuring that children and other segments of the population consume a nutritionally adequate diet through a diversity of foods, so in a natural sense. But the reality is that that's sometimes impossible to achieve for many reasons. I think if we focus in on iron, I think there are evolutionary reasons that it's difficult to achieve to meet needs of iron for young children through diet alone, which is where fortification came about in response to deficiency and an inadequate supply. If we look at iodization of salt, it's still responsible for a lot of the benefits in terms of the virtual elimination of goiter. And in the example that's specified that we see in fortification of foods in high-income countries, the virtual elimination of beriberi in those contexts early on. Taking that away without a longer-term solution it can be difficult in the sense that when we lag back on iodization, for example, we do see a re-emergence of goiter or iodine deficiency. That having been said, I think in terms of thinking about its place in diets, it needs to be in response to specific needs, and it's not a long-term solution. So we do need to track and make sure that other complementary solutions are strengthened in the meantime, and we can beef up natural sources of diets. We do have to pay attention to long-term fortification for one, and then the example that was noted by the questioner, that we don't want it to get bad actors off the hook, or to assume that if we fortify ultra-processed foods, then we're doing good, when there are other alternatives that would be worthwhile. So it's important to look at it in terms of its place as a short to medium-term solution, but then also pay attention to some of the knock-on effects or bad actions that can be masked. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Well, we've only got 5 minutes left. I don't know where the time has gone. It's been so interesting. So I'm going to finish off with one more question, which is an audience question, but I'm going to embellish it with a little bit of my own question. So the audience question is, what are the challenges to implementing policies which are favourable to children and family. And I want to just, when you answer that, and if you can keep your answers brief, then you'll all get a chance to answer. If you can think of that in relation to some of the particular challenges which we're facing today, whether that's climate change, we're now COP27 is going on, and there are massive warnings about the difficulty of combating climate change, and that may put additional strain on the ability to enact coherent policies like you're all recommending, which is great. But so climate change, but also wars, political insecurity, global recessions, these all really do offer major challenges. Which are the biggest challenges? Are these the major challenges, or is it things which are more particular to actually getting things enacted in particular areas or political solutions? I'm going to go to Rodrigo first.
Okay, thank you. And well, this is definitely a challenging question, but let me try to answer. I think let me split into the more structural challenges and like climate change, for instance, and other type of challenges that probably are more immediate, like food prices spikes and other issues. I think one of the main challenges for now is after the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine, I think it's trying to curb food prices increases with a little fiscal space. I think the challenging now the governments are facing is how to not only have more coherence in their policies, but also how to funding these policies. I think this is an immediate challenge that we definitely need to address. And also in terms of the more structural challenges, we definitely need to address the all the issues related to climate change, especially because of their effects that might have on food production, food processing, and therefore in food prices and in turn in the affordability of healthy diets. I think I would say that these are two of the main challenges that I see. One immediate and one more in the structural and in the long term that we need to address. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you very much. We're really running out of time, so I'm going to say one sentence each. Akanksha.
Yeah, it's keeping track of the big things and the smaller things that also really matter. And it's just repeating what others had said is, I think you need both short, medium, and longer term policies, and they need to change along the pathway and the life course as we go along. So it's complex, but I think we have enough experience to actually make a start.
Thank you. Anne, one sentence.
One sentence, it would be that we need our governments to act more rapidly to changing circumstances and not take 10, 20 years in trying to get their policies implemented.
Excellent, thank you. That was very nice and concise and good message. The poll is just about to be opened while Nduduzi makes his final sentence.
Gosh, diversify food systems, diverse foods, diverse financing, and diverse processes so that they're more resilient.
Great, thank you very much. We'd really like you to vote again. The poll is just opened. It would be really interesting to see if the answers differ to those which you gave before. So please write your answers, make your choices here. These are the same questions which you had before. Which factor do you think is the most important in preventing us from keeping our children healthy? Cost, availability or access, or education? And do you think you have enough resources to raise healthy children? Just before we get the results of those, which will come in a moment, I just want to say an enormous thanks to our panelists for joining us and for giving us such a really exciting discussion and really interesting discussion. And I can confirm that actually you have changed your mind as a result of what they've said. So before you said that the biggest impediment to healthy children you thought was cost, and now you think it's availability or access, and slightly fewer of you think that we have enough resources to raise healthy children. So I think, you know, this is a really great thing about having this sorts of things. It's enabled people to learn. I've learned an awful lot, and thank you very much to our speakers again. And hopefully we'll see you at another event.